Let's see. So everybody's awake. I'm here to talk about how we can keep the world centralized, that we can get rid of all this nasty decentralization, how we can get rid of open source and get back to that kind of world where we're being taken care of by nice corporate interests.
Yeah.
Amen. You know, that's not the reaction I expected.
What type?
The history of corporations. Corporations actually came up, as we understand them, in the history at about the 1600s. Corporations were a distillation of what governments and religious institutions were doing in the past. Basically, providing a way of organizing labor and resources to produce goods and services that persisted over time, despite the fact that people die and run away from home and all kinds of other things, and kids grow up and replace them. You have to have some way of organizing effort to build pyramids and build walls of China and arcs and all sorts of other things, and that's been done by governments and religious institutions. Corporations began to take over in the 1600s. They continued to take ground, producing more goods and services all the way up until the modern age. And at this point in time, if you look at who is controlling the world, who's producing the goods and services of this world, it is pretty much clear that corporations have won. Back. Wait. Yeah, they have won. But I also got ahead of myself. How did they win? This is the nature of corporations. This is what's required to build pyramids and walls of China and all that sort of stuff. You have to be able to collect and manage capital. You have to be able to collect and manage infrastructure. You have to be able to pay people wages. You have to be able to pay other organizations to cooperate with you. You have to be able to enter into contracts and accept liability. You basically have to do all that stuff about law and governance in the greater society, and that's what the entering into contracts and holding liability is all about. You also have to actually carry the whip. You have to be able to provide the governance that drives production, drives distribution, and drives marketing. And lastly, you have to be able to establish a corporate identity. So all of us recognize Coca-Cola, right? Does anyone believe that Coca-Cola is the same company it was 100 years ago? No, it's managed to maintain its identity. And it's been able to do this despite the fact that corporations are not governments and corporations are not religious institutions. Okay, well, there's Apple. But besides Apple, they are not religious institutions. Open source is the first, this is what I was leading up to earlier, but I got it backwards. Open source is the first challenge to the corporations that's come up with the internet. We now have the ability as individuals to call up each other over the internet, send data, cooperate, and build goods and services, maybe mostly digital, if you don't count 3D printed guns. Mostly digital, well, maybe those are digital, because you do get the plans over the internet. The idea is with the internet, we're beginning to cooperate and build things on our own outside of corporate governments, corporate-driven distribution, and corporate-driven marketing. Now, if I look at the biggest projects, though, Linux, Eclipse, the Apache projects, these actually act more like foundations that corporations kind of cooperate in order to build stuff. So open source by itself hasn't quite broken the back of this trend towards doing all of our production underneath corporate guidance. But there might be an example of something that kind of has. I'm trying to think. Is there something? Maybe Bitcoin, okay? Bitcoin is our first truly decentralized application. There is no corporate Bitcoin. I mean, there's a Bitcoin Foundation thing, but there's no corporation that says this is what's going on. There's no corporation that's in control. There are no copyrights and patents that people are having to pay against because some group owns Bitcoin. Nobody owns it. It's truly decentralized. So Linux couldn't break free really of the corporate world, and SQL really couldn't, and OpenOffice really couldn't. What makes Bitcoin able to break free from the corporate world? Well, I think if I were to go back to what corporations do, it must somehow cover all these bases. So let's see, how does it do that? Well, first of all, it manages capital because it is capital. Well, that's good, all right? It somehow manages to inspire infrastructure. We had a panel about guys talking about mining. Somehow or other, it manages in some way to generate infrastructure. How does it do that? Well, it's able to pay people. Now, this is actually kind of mind-blowing. It's able to actually pay people, and if people are willing to take the money from Bitcoin, they're able to follow the protocol, which provides the governance. They're able to promote the identity of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin itself doesn't have to do anything. I mean, this is actually really, really powerful. So what Bitcoin has proven is that we can begin to replace business processes, in fact, all the business processes, with functionality based on the blockchain. And if you replace all the major functions of a corporation with functions based off of the blockchain and based off of participants that are incentivized to cooperate, you begin to replace actual corporations. So let's think about exactly how we do that. So how do we manage capital and infrastructure and pay wages if we're some arbitrary application that wants to be a decentralized application as opposed to a centralized one? You're going to have to be able to pay them. You're going to have some token that you can use to incentivize individuals and even corporations. I mean, you know, BitPay is helping Bitcoin along, and Coinbase is helping Bitcoin along. They're not doing it for free, right? They're doing it because there's business models that they can use to leverage Bitcoin, because Bitcoin can automate certain business processes and reduce the costs and overhead to real businesses. In other words, people can make money off of it, and that's why those are there. So you've got to have a token that provides some incentive to drive the system and produce these opportunities for everyone to cooperate with you. And if they cooperate with you, instead of the functionality being in a big corporation, it gets broken out into some of these small businesses. And as you further replace business processes with functions that can be driven against the blockchain, it gets broken out further and further. The more you break it out, the more decentralized you are, and eventually your whole app is a completely decentralized application. So how in the world do you deal with contracts, liability, marketing, the law, regulations? Well, with Bitcoin, you provide enough financial incentive that the people cooperating in the system are willing to take up those responsibilities. You know, I don't know if you've noticed this, but Bitcoin hasn't actually signed a treaty to allow international transactions, right? They're not, Bitcoin hasn't shown up at the Senate hearings in the US, and it hasn't shown up here in Israel to testify in front of Parliament. Do you have Parliament? I'm not entirely sure about the, what's that? Those guys. They haven't come up in front of those guys. Bitcoin doesn't do that. Bitcoin incentivizes you guys to go do it for it, sort of, right? If you can bring the money in, you can incentivize people to do all those necessary tasks and take them on for themselves. And lastly, you have to have a ledger. Now, Bitcoin is the first decentralized application. Its ledger is really simple. In my little picture, I have on the right-hand columns there a bunch of numbers, and that's essentially all Bitcoin does, is transfer funds from one thing to the other. But when you get into generalized, decentralized applications, you may need more complex notations. You may need more than what Bitcoin provides. Okay, everybody that doesn't like a personal plug, y'all just you put fingers in your ears and go la 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 like that. Okay, I'm working on Factom, and Factom provides a general purpose ledger so that applications can be decentralized. And that's it, folks. Thank you for listening to me. Are there any questions? What? Well, at least you're awake. Everybody understands decentralized applications. Well, let me ask you guys a question, if you don't have one immediately for me. How interested are you in decentralizing business processes? People that really think that's a big deal? Okay. Anybody unconvinced? Okay. There's at least one honest person. Come up here. No, I'm kidding. I think that that's important. How many people have problems with decentralized applications issuing tokens? Is there any of those people?
See that?
Oh, right there. Big one over there. Let me give a little observation about these tokens that I've been thinking about for the last month or so. When David first proposed this model for our project, I really spent some time thinking about these decentralized tokens. And as I thought about more and more tokens, like tokens for implementing Dropbox-like functionality with Storage A, right? And tokens over here for perhaps a application for ride sharing. That's like Zeus. Yes. Yeah, it's Zeus's move, right? Right? Okay. Okay, see, I'm learning Hebrew. So that's like that. And so let's say there are thousands of these tokens, and people are cooperating to get these tokens, you know, because they have value, because at the very least they can use them to execute, to run these these applications. And so as they do these tokens, now they're exchanging them so that somebody who does a lot of Dropbox functionality can actually ride a car, and somebody who's doing a lot of car stuff can go and put entries into Factom, and somebody who's doing that, supporting that system can go over and, I don't know, pick olives, all right, at a special farm that has olive tokens. What you really are doing is beginning to come into a world where we're replacing a purely monetary system based on banking with an actual kind of a barter system where people can contribute to what really strikes them as a wonderful thing and use that to get other goods and services and not be banking oriented. Anyway, that was an observation. If there's nothing else, thank you very much.